this morning is Harold Morgan, who will be talking about the P47 in World War II. Thank you.
Good morning, all. As usual, you can ask questions at the end, or you can ask questions through the show. It'll be perfectly all right. There's no script. It's all in the pictures. So, this is a new slide. It occurred to me some time ago to kind of count the number of workers that were working in the major war plants and what they did in Evansville. So if you look, there was about 15,000 workers that made the bullets. That's Chrysler and Sunbeam and the supporting companies. There was about 21,000, and this includes Mesker Steel and Cook, who was making the air conditioning or the air ducting for the LSTs, and those at the shipyard. So about 21,000 men and women were working on the LSTs. Look at this. There was at least 30,000 people in Evansville working on airplanes. Where Surville, Hoosier Cardinal, a great number of men and women worked at Briggs, Indiana, which was on East Columbia Street, right at the railroad tracks, making Corsair wings there. There were several other plants. There was a modification center at the airport. They had 900 people. So Evansville was an aircraft town. And here was the problem. When Republic Aviation came to Evansville, the highest technology, the most difficult, challenging thing being made in Evansville was a Plymouth automobile and a Surville refrigerator. Cold Spot was also, Seeger was also, what became Seeger and Whirlpool was also making a refrigerator. By the way, I don't know if that's a pre-war or post-war car, but I thought you'd like it. Do you know what they're doing? They're loading these Plymouth cars onto the barges. This is out at the Meade Johnson Terminal, which is still there on the Ohio River. They used to ship the bulk of the Plymouth cars by river traffic down to Memphis, where they offload them and take them into the south. So here they are. See, they got it all slung up, and they're going to swing that thing out over that barge and load them on. They'd make them 3 and 4 deep. This is all framework. They begin to lose those in three barges. 3 separate river barges were lost in the 1950s, ice and flood, and just one just sank. So they quit doing that. And of course, Plymouth, you know, phased out a few years after that. This was the Evansville Airport, and here's Republic Aviation. This is 1942. I live, by the way, right here. This is where I grew up, was right here, all through the war years and until 1947. So this story I'm telling you is very personal. It was my dad moved, mom and dad and I moved to Evansville in late 1942, and Dad hired on making P47. But I'm going to show you this again. But I want to tell you that when Republic Aviation came to Evansville, this was a perfect place to build airplanes. Look what they had. There's a 4-lane highway. By the way, see it ends right there. It's on a 2-lane going on out. Highway 57. Right there was where 41 4-lane ended. So they had a 4-lane highway, a railroad track here, which didn't count, but this one really did. They had the airport. So they had all of these things to build this great wartime plant. How they got this assembled, they started this in February 1942, 2.5–3 months after Pearl Harbor. But they got it going. Did anyone in here know Ed Miller? Remember Ed Miller? I knew Ed Miller at Old North Methodist Church, where he was my scoutmaster after the war. And he died a few years ago. He was my senior pastor at First United Methodist Church in Mount Vernon. So I knew Ed Miller when he was a young man. I knew Ed Miller when he was an old man. But this man, when he was a boy, I think he had just barely turned 18, hired in Republic Aviation when it looked something like this. See what they're doing right here. This is the south end of the plant. Up here is the north end of the plant, so they're building it this way. This is the office building that they built in 2 months. Notice it looks like an airplane. It's still there, but it's all concealed now, as they have brought the International Harvester brought the building out to this front. And up here is where this was where my dad worked. This was the pre-flight hangar. There's 2 hangars. I'll show you more about those as we go. The reason they did this was so they could build quick P47s. Ed Miller told about when they were working here, and when they would bring the building out this way, and they would hang tarpaulins on the ends of it, wood boards, so they could begin to do P47 work even back in here. They were in a hurry to get these airplanes built. So Ed told about the snakes, the terrapins, the rabbits, the mosquitoes, the flies that would fly in day and night, and their birds would build the nest and all such things. So they were fighting the elements, if you would, to get the P47 plant going as it moved to the north. They did this one so quickly because they had to administer all of this work. And up here was where they built the first 5 P47s, and I'll show you that. I should include in here, but I don't have a picture of him. The first American civilian, the first civilian in Evansville, Vandenberg County, died while putting up steel for this plant. Elder Miller, he was an African American, had 3 children, I think, and he got hit in the head with a piece of steel from a building and died. He has no gravestone. I went to Oak Hill Cemetery to try to find his stone. There's nothing. There's quite a few graves out there just unmarked, even as late as 1942. So if I had anything, all I have is his obituary, and I didn't want to bore you with that. The P47s they built at Evansville were only 2 kinds. They were all of the D models, and the N model. And they changed constantly as they went on to upgrade the P47, just as you would a computer or anything else. But here was the major changes they made. This was painted, and then they stopped just the blonde model with no paint, and then they changed the canopy in 1944. And this was the N model, which was made to fight in Japan, long range over the water. So it has wing tanks, built-in tanks that are just loaded up with gasoline to make the flights from Okinawa to Japan and back. So that was what the last model they made was. This was the first airplane, and this was out there in the hangar. Right here was where this picture's made. Right here. Notice this. It will fly. This is September the 7th, and it will fly 12 days later. My goodness, how did they? You know how? And I know this is break timer. Shift change. International Steel worked 2 10-hour shifts, 5 days a week, and then they worked 2 8-hour shifts on Saturday and Sunday. But you had to work there 7 days for the war. You had, if a plant was going to operate, it had to make war materials, and it had to run 7 days a week. Most of them used 3 24-hour shifts, but Republic was different. So this thing right here, I'll forget to show you, but this is, they had, I don't know, 40 or 50 of these things hydraulically. This is what, when the airplane got assembled, where they could start building onto it, they would mount it on here. So this was used throughout the plant as we go through. And here it was on the 19th of September, it did fly, the Hoosier Spirit. Notice this one is on the 7th of September, 19th of September, 12 days later, they made that airplane fly. And I bet this was a crude airplane. It was scavenged together. The story, and I can only tell you one sentence that was in I'm a newspaper historian. There was several P47s being built in vacant buildings around Evansville. That's what the newspaper article said, and I can't find any more. Where were these vacant buildings? Because everybody was filling up for war effort. You know, I don't know if it's schools, houses, warehouses, filling state, I don't know. But any place that Republic could find that was empty and they could put men and women in there to work, they did. This was a plan after it was built. I've been researching that house right there, and by 1946, this house is gone. And I don't know the date on this one. Everything's working. Here's a gun butt. Here's a compass rose sticking its head up. And this was a test strip and there's a P47 on it right there. This test strip was where they did several things to mark the man that was talking last week out at the airport about all of the RPMs and all of those. That's what this guy is doing right here, and burning in the brakes on the P47s. So this was a plant, this was a story. all completed. Notice the railroad track here, the 4-lane Highway 41. And this is the planned view of the plant, looking down on it. A man gave me this, Whirlpool personnel manager, and this is a treasure. This is one of my greatest possessions, was this piece of paper. Here's the Republic Aviation building. It goes on back past here. There's the office that looks like an airplane. And here's where my dad worked. When the airplanes were flown, test flown, they would bring them back into here. Pre-flight was right in this hangar. This was where they would modify the defects they would find on a test flight for the P47. I'm going to show you a picture of this area right in here, and it's just all benches. They start with the smallest stuff and end up with a finished product, as you would naturally do. This is modern. This was high-tech assembly. Toyota does exactly this thing today. Republic Aviation had 4 assembly lines. See down in here, there it's like 8, 10 or 12, and they would take these smaller parts and merge them into larger. Look here, I'll show you a picture right about this point right here as we go through, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of them in here. This is all packed together, and it was methodically, every man and woman did the same thing every day, every day, every day, every day. So they got very good at their craft. Here are those benches I was talking to you about that are in this area right in here. See all of these little benches? See the people working? Over in this bay, which I've cut out for time, was where they were doing the sheet metal bending, punching, drilling, and all of that. A lot of machines over in here for just handling aluminum. Down in the this is from the south end looking high. That's the north end doors, and you'll see those several times. See the P47's way down here? So they start with these small parts, and they get larger, larger, larger. The next pictures I'll show you are taking place right about there. I'm sorry. These women right in here are putting together small, see they're doing different things, instruments, tubing, wiring, and such things as that had to be assembled to install in the P47. You start with small parts, work with the big parts. And now I'm going to show you 5 consecutive pictures. This is P47 number 1000. And it was called 1000. Its name is a Tojo Special. You know what Tojo? You recognize the name Tojo? He was a Japanese prime minister that I learned to hate. I learned to hate him as I learned to hate Mussolini and Hitler, and probably you all did. They taught this in school. You read it in the newspapers. You were taught to hate the enemy. You had to. How could you go out and fight and kill the enemy? But it was an easy thing to do. It came very natural. It was not something you had to be taught to do. Even though I was 7 and 8 years old during this, I remember hating Hitler, and it was just the way it was. So this was a Tojo Special. See, these pieces had all been already bent and shaped there in the area I didn't show you in the main plan. And here they're putting in Tojo Clips. See these sheets? I'll pass these around. These are still in use today, and this was a secret during World War II. The Tojo Clip and Tojo pliers. Now, as they come around, you can see her pliers, see her pliers. That's what you're going to see. All of these sheets were pre-drilled. Precisely, I don't know how they did that. Today, boom, you know, your machinery to do it. Well, they did this manually fed, and I'm sure it was computerized. And that's not the right word, but it was computerized to some extent to where each one of these sheets could have all of the, because see the sheets are different shapes. Can you dig that? You had to cut this because everything's getting larger. See up here? See it's necking down and it's curving. You had to do all of that, so I don't know how they made those, but they did. And it was, when they brought these out here, they would be assembled to these things. See the stringers in here, the ribs? So those sheets are all being connected by Tojo Clips. Later on, when you got your sheets all ready, you would start to rivet. And these women are riveting. See their rivet guns? There's 6 women. Republic Aviation did a lot of time study on how to assemble, how many people, how close they could. See the next one over here? If I go back and show you, back in this area, it was barely room to walk between the fuselage parts. And this is the top part of a P47 fuselage. Somebody else is making the bottom part of the P47 fuselage. So the women are driving the rivets. You count 6 of them on top. Hey, there's 6 women underneath them, bucking those rivets. Every rivet would have the driven smooth head on the outside, but down inside she has this little steel bar that's making that rivet head flatten out underneath so that these sheets will remain there during gunfights and loops and dives and all of that. This guy's trying to get a date. These guys are holding the sign. Notice the men holding the sign, women doing the work. I got more to go on this. So now this is the top of the Tojo Special, number 1000. And here they are, number 1000, number 1000. They're splicing the top, which you just saw, onto the bottom, which you did not see, but the men again are supervising. And this guy's wearing gloves. You know, that's sharp stuff. Personal protection was not even a thought back in these days. No safety shoes, no safety glasses, no hearing protection. You know, this work right here was tremendously loud. There was probably 300 or 400 riveters in an area twice the size of this whole room. Imagine that. 6 women on every one of these, 300, 400, 500 riveters going all at once, because this was never stopping. This was all around the clock when they were doing all of this. Here's number 1000, men taking the accolades for it. Women are off, they're working on number 1001 and 2. So this is number 1000. Must be in final assembly by December the 1st, so it can fly on December the 7th, 1943. Now let's go away from that. This is just a generic photo of the north end of the Republic Aviation plant. Notice the thing that they're setting on, and as it goes down here to those north doors, look here, no tail, wings. Tails are put on up in here. I'll show you these 3 lines over here better. But look at this. These are engines at the end of the war, and there were no great records were kept. But at the end of the war, it appears that Republic was producing about 10 P47s per day. This first 100 were about 1 or 2, maybe 3 per day if we really got lucky. And remember this, these airplanes were being improved, perfected. The people were used to doing this. I've always done it like this. I'm not going to change. So time sped up. And from 2 or 3 per day, they were down to 10, 11, or 12 per day towards the end of the war. And the airplane got simpler. They were always improving it. You know, they were changing out. They were always trying to make their P47 lighter. If you could change out some kind of an instrument that was made out of cast iron or cast aluminum, you would do so because it would lighten it by a few ounces. And that's what you wanted to do, is make the airplane lighter, stronger, faster, and higher. So the 10 engines, 10 airplanes. Just like what Toyota uses, just in time it's called. You don't want a warehouse full of widgets. You only want enough widgets there that you can use in one day. Whether it's tires at Toyota, or rims, or steering wheels, or left seats, or right seats, that's just in time delivery. And that's the way we practice, that's the way we do it today. And that's what Republic's doing. They didn't want a warehouse full of wings, they wanted just enough for that day. And here's the other part over here where you can see the guys putting on the tails. See, that tail's not quite finished, and here it is. Notice the use of wood. They were using a lot of wood back in those days. Saved metal, lighter, easier to push around. No handrails, no OSHA back in those days, so everything is kind of crude. And they're all going towards that north door. See, they put the propellers on last. That's because it was always dangerous. And Mark, you know this, when you walk around airplanes out there, walking into that propeller, I'm talking about still, I'm not talking about spinning. But the propellers were always a personnel hazard. Dad saw the day there was a young man who had just hired in, and they didn't teach him about the spinning propellers, and he was working out on the apron and walked into the propeller. Dad worked in that flight building. That's where the young man was thrown. He was instantly killed. But no safety training. Wouldn't you think that a young man or a new employee would be taught, beware of spinning propellers? It would chill me to think of that. Let's go to Servelle, where Servelle built the P47 wings for Evansville and Farmingdale, New York. Notice the muffin tins. Muffin tins went to war in World War II. There's no doubt about it. This was perfect for the rivets, the nuts, the cotter keys, the little bolts and things. They would use 2 or 3 different size rivets in typical operation. These are probably, that's a wing spar. That's what kept the wings on the wings together, and they were attached to the fuselage down this great spar. So these may be heavier rivets than what the women were using in the skin. But nonetheless, muffin tins, they were so important all through the aircraft assembly. See the muffin tins? There's 3 women. This is the top surface, I believe the top surface of the P47 wing. It could be the bottom. But there's another woman down here that's bucking that rivet. And notice she's had a full-time job of keeping this thing perfectly level, flat, and smooth. The wings were critical on an airplane because you didn't want wrinkles that would slow you down, make it a less attractive assembly. And Servell made good wings, make no mistake about it. They made about 25,000, I'd say 12,500 or maybe 13,000 right wings and 13,000 or so left wings. There were a few others made, but Servell was the bulk provider for the wings. This is an end wing. You can see it squared off, but I want to talk about this young man right here. You know, there was child labor laws were passed in around World War I, and there's scandalous pictures of 14-year-old and 12-year-olds working in the cotton mill out on where Meade Johnson is now, and the basket plant where children were making baskets night and day. This boy's 14 years old, perfectly legal in World War II. This young man, I kept seeing his face here, and here he is at some school. I don't know if this was Wrights, Bossy, Central, or Memorial. Those were the high schools we had in World War II. He's getting his work permit. And if your principal signed off on you because your parents said it was okay and you wanted to do it, 14-year-olds worked in the war, but they could rivet, they could weld. I don't show pictures of the beautiful young woman at about 18, maybe 16 or 17, doing her welding at the shipyard. So here he is working on this wing. I kept seeing the face, and I know that guy. Sure enough, when I put them together, this is the same young man clearly. Here they are putting on the Servell wings on a P47. See, it's fairly light. You wouldn't want it on your toe, but a wing was like 1,000 pounds. I'm guessing, raw guess on that. So just this light sling, and they're assembling it, installing it onto the P47 itself. Go to Hoosier Cardinal. You've seen this sign down here on First Avenue. It's still there. It doesn't say Hoosier Cardinal anymore. This building was torn. It looks like a pretty new building. And I don't know if this was the Hoosier Cardinal expansion for World War II or not. I don't know. It could have been before, during, and after, because it's hard to track buildings by such detail. So yeah, that's still up there, and what they did, they carried their stuff over here to this building, back and forth, foot traffic, equipment, whatever you had to have. And these women are making a horizontal stabilizer for the P47. Pretty young, aren't they, all 3 of them? Yeah. 16, 17, you can name it. But they're building, it looks like they're not riveting, maybe they're wiring and using rivets, bolts, nuts, cotter connections such as that. And here they are with a vertical stabilizer, and you can see number 9, so there must be 9 or 10 where they're making the vertical stabilizer. This is horizontal, the flat part. This was the vertical part, and here it is. The first Hoosier Cardinal P47 tail fin, they call it, the vertical stabilizer. This woman, when I read the caption, this is my other mother. Her name was Teresa Epperson. She was a lifelong teacher after the war at Centennial, where she taught elementary school at Centennial. Her husband was Charles Epperson, who was a history teacher at Wrights, and he was my other father. Charlie Epperson, their son, was my best man when I got married. So I was just shocked to see Thelma's mother Epperson's picture up there. And here they are assembling the tail. That's the vertical, the horizontal, and they're assembling it on a P47. This was my dad's job, was down in here, was to inspect the final assembly on the tail, and he would check to make sure that all of this was connected. There was wire, there was electrical wiring for lights, and there was where you would work these by a cable. So he was checking all of that, as well as the tail wheel. And here there's one of those 10 engines per day or whatever it was they were assembling. Pratt & Whitney engine made by Ford Company. This is a good story. See how I know? Oh, it's a little bit off. That's the word Ford right there, and you have to read off the edge. During World War II, patents went away. They just forgot about patents. So Pratt & Whitney asked Ford to build their engines. A good local story was the bullet primer material that was used at Chrysler to make those 3.5 billion bullets. When you pull the trigger and the bullet was ignited, it was from the primer. Little tiny dab. It was the most dangerous stuff in the tri-state because it would explode with anything. Just shock. That's how it went off, was a shock of a firing pin hitting it. So you didn't want it around lightning. When it was wet, it was like bread dough. You can knead it and everything, but as it dried out, they would make them in 3-pound loaves, just looked like bread, and they would have it, keep having it to smaller parts, because one loaf, I'm not forgetting how, it was nearly 100,000 bullets, primers. So this was, they gave that recipe to Chrysler, and Chrysler devised and used that recipe to make the primer material, and then after the war they certified, sent it back to the factory and tore it up and certified they no longer wanted or had that recipe. And that's the way the Ford Motor Company did all of this, is Pratt & Whitney design. And here they are working back on the Tojo Special. Remember the Tojo? I count 14 people on this is the left wing, the port side wing. I count 14 people getting it ready. It had to fly the next day. And I expect there was about that many people on the other side. Makes you wonder, wing loading they call it, you know, how many people could be up on the wing before it started to wrinkle and fail. And here's a Tojo Special. These are those north doors I was telling you. They're gone now because International Harvester and Whirlpool extended this plant out. Some of these doors are still out there, and hidden away. You could see them, but you can't get to them. Why they didn't? I guess it was cheaper to leave them there right to today than to take them out. I see all of these military. I see a cake. Republic had 8,300 employees, half night, half day, more or less. So that would be 4,000 people. I doubt if that cake's going to feed these 4,000 people, huh? But that was a Tojo Special, and this was on December, I guess, the morning. I think this is nighttime. See, the windows are all dark, and I guess this is December the 6th, and the next day it will fly. This was where my dad worked. It was in a pre-flight hangar, and they would put in the oil, the liquids, and do all of that, and the inspectors were doing the final inspection out here in this hangar. And this is where Dad worked, the tail wheel up in here. This is out in the apron north of the big building. This looks like my dad and I, but look at the background. Look at the background. Can you imagine that? The P47's are all around there playing shuffleboard. Hold on. Today, you know, Mark, how much would we give to do this today, huh? Mark is on the museum, and they're going, I'm pretty sure they're going to get us a P47. So anyhow, we can think about them with contributions, donations, and support. But this looks much like my dad playing shuffleboard, and this is how my dad looked. Dad always wore a t-shirt and khakis. I continue the family heritage of wearing khakis. So anyhow, this is Morganfield where my grandfather worked. He was an early and late carpenter at Camp Breckenridge. He worked there for about 8 years to build it, and then stayed after World War II. But across the street was the Morganfield machine plant, and so many of the Morgan pictures are made. I have mine made with that sign in the background. This is a picture of the P47 as they're coming out to get an E Award. And you know what the E Awards, you've heard of them. That was for production excellence. They built almost 6,700 P47 in World War II. The wartime average was 6 per day, and then towards the end of the war, in 44 and 45, they were getting it up to the 10 per day. But here's a P47 in the background over here. Here was the hangar my dad worked in, a pre-flight hangar. And there's the office. This was the lunchroom. They had 2 lunchrooms, and Dad ate here typically because that left Mom and me with a little bit more bologna, a little bit more eggs, a little bit more bacon and pasta. We didn't have steak, and we certainly didn't have bacon. That was a choice thing, was bacon during World War II. But all of that went to war, correctly so. I had no complaints. See, the root beer ice was 5 cents each, and salads and fish. A lot of people made a living off of killing game during World War II, and they'd sell it. You could just soon have deer ham as pig ham. It was meat, so people would do that. This was a gun butt. I showed you a picture of it long distance. I'll show you that again from another aerial view as we go through. This is not, flight engineers before an P47 was flown did all of their pre-flight work out on the airport, the compass rose, the gun butt, the test strip. This is not one. This is the armaments. They had a special group out here with a shed, and what they're firing into is its standard 50. They didn't have different designs. The Army had a design for 30 small arms gun butts, 50 caliber gun butts, and this was a large one, which was really logs and dirt. Log and dirt. And there's no record about how did they maintain, because this was getting tons per day of lead, and you wanted, they clean all of these. See the brass cartridges here? Of course, this was gold. So none of this was waste, my goodness gracious. Even on shipboard, when they saved those 5-inch shells to bring them back home, a lot of them got kicked over, I know, overboard, but they bring back what they could because we needed all the metals we could get. So these would all be gathered up, the chain links that they had to hold these together. Here's where when the flight engineer would put it on these chalks, and the armament crew would come out and they'd load these guns and the ones on the far wing, and the guy would get in and test the guns. About 40, it's not about, but as best I could tell, it's about 40 rounds of each 4 guns. 40 rounds per gun, 4 guns on this wing, 4 guns on the other wing. And I only lived a half mile from here for years, and I don't remember the sound. I remember only large flights of P47s, 10, 20, 30. Remember, 10 per day, they were flying 10 per day more or less away. So they would largely gather up, and this was largely women. I'll show you the test pilots were, the ferry pilots were largely women. I'll show you some pictures as we go through. So this is a big deal. This strip is still there where they would pull up. I'll show you to on aerial. It's all covered up now by grass. I don't know if you can see it today, but I'll show you a picture where you can still see it peeking up through the grass. These are the gun mauls. These guns are heavy. They're about 60, 65 pounds each. And as long as the women kept them vertical like that, it was okay. And I guess they were able to lower them down. When Whirlpool was closing, they took this picture and went out and found this wall and this table. That's a metal rim table, and that table was still there 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So this was the gun mauls, and here's an airplane that was named Gun Mauls. This is the Evansville built P47, and it's Madeline, Marion, Billy, and Jane. Well, there's 5 of them here, and I'm not sure one of them is new or old or left out or something, because 4 of these women got their names on that P47 nose. This is real life, this was wartime. This was somewhere in Europe or the Pacific. Here's some of the test pilots. I had 2 kinds of test pilots at the Republic. You have the civilian test pilots who did the great risk. And, flying a P40, what if the wheel blows out? What if the wheel comes off? What if the hydraulic thing up here is not securely put together? And early on, those things probably happened, but later on, everybody got very, very professional and very good at their work. So I'm guessing the first P47 was probably pretty much a nightmare, not worth really keeping, maybe even, same as the LSTs were, the first one, but later on it got better. This man and this woman are close friends, that's why she's up there. See, they got their stuff, they got their gear on their knees, and what they would do, the test pilots, there was about 10 of them that Republic Aviation had. A test pilot would never make a first flight, pardon me, Mark, a test pilot would never make 2 first flights a day. I'm talking about Virgin airplanes. They were very careful about doing it because that was the risky one. You know, that first flight was always risk on taxiing, explosion, takeoff, landing, and all of that. And these test pilots flew those airplanes, they flew them hard because they had to do the test on them that a pilot would take in aerial combat, strafing, you know, low flying, high flying, steep dives. So these guys had to do all of that. It was not just to go out and fly it around, but they would have their favorite places. Some would go to Mount Vernon, some would go to Princeton. I'm talking about a specified area that they were well acquainted with. They knew the trees, the lakes, the roads, barns, because when they would start some maneuver, they would know they'd started on Farmer Jones's barn, and when they got through, they should be on the intersection of 2 roads. So they could gauge the airplane's performance by what they knew. So they would go into their own personal place, whether it was in Henderson County, Warwick, Gibson, Posey, or Vandenberg. So that's what these guys would do. When they got through, when they brought in their notes on here, they would take it to the other hangar from where my dad worked, and they would fix the problems. And then when all of the problems were fixed, the Army pilots would take them out and fly and say, I'll buy it. And when the Army test pilot signed off on it, Republic Aviation would be paid somewhere down the road for that airplane. This was a test pilot's lounge. It's still up there. You can see it from St. George Road. But during World War II, this was all clear glass. This was a palace. This was the test pilot's lounge. And it was all glass, clear glass. You could see north, south, east, and west, and straight up. And I'm sure only the janitor would be the only other person that would come, maybe an invited ferry pilot. I'll show you them in a moment. I don't know that. I don't know the answer to all of that. But this was God's country. This was test pilot country, and I guess the janitor and whoever was serving would come up there, and that would be about it. These are women ferry pilots, WASP, Women's Auxiliary Service Pilots, WASP, Women's Auxiliary Ferry Service, Women's Ferry Transportation Detachment. I think that's what they were called. And I count on there 15 women, and I guess this was the guy that was in charge. This was quite a problem. The women would come into Evansville, but whether it's by landing on a DC-3 C-47 or a train or maybe a bus, whatever, they would come into Evansville. Where were they going to go eat? They had no cars. They knew only that their work was at the airport. So Republic Aviation rented an apartment unit somewhere on the north side of Evansville, I understand out around Bossy Field, where they could go and get their rest, get their sleep, clean up, get a meal. I don't know if the meals were brought in or if it was nearby a restaurant. Never heard where it was. Women, I'm sorry, had a difficult time in World War II. They just couldn't walk in anywhere. When you had a house for rent, a spare bedroom or garage or attic or basement, the wife of the house wouldn't like younger women coming to rent that apartment. Works the other way too. So, you know, like a man of the house wouldn't like some man, a handsome man, coming to rent the basement apartment. So it didn't work well. But women had especially a hard time, and Republic took care of this. I don't know, you know, you had women at work at the shipyard, you had naval women at work. I guess the shipyard probably did the same thing for their naval women employees as Republic did. Now that didn't work out here for the riveters that I was showing you. They generally commuted, or they kind of worked and lived together. It was a hard time. It was really a problem, kind of hid low key, but it was a problem. All on the P47. This flight. There's 2 P47s. This touched wings right over where the 4-H farm is now. And this one crashed, the other one hit the rail tracks and burned. But here's a story I want to tell you about this. See that barn? When I showed this picture back a year or so ago, the woman called me. This is her barn right now. It was her father's barn during World War II, and her son was just married in this barn a month before she called me. So that barn is still there as of at least a year or so ago. Another interesting story, this thing is all saturated with gasoline. And a lot of people came out here to see this, including the manager at Republic Aviation and the officer in charge. Well, the officer in charge had out his cigarette and was somewhere right here going to light up the cigarette, and the farmer said, "Don't you do that. You can't do that. You can't smoke it." "I can if I want to." He said, "Look at the gasoline." The officer put a cigarette in his pocket and went on about his business. I didn't show you the one because it's just a crumble. It was on the railroad tracks right there where the 4-H center is. Now this one was different. If you look right straight back up over the hill, that's where the north-south runway is at today. That's where the north-south runway is. This airplane took off on a now north-south runway and got about 700 feet high, and his engine completely failed. Completely failed. And this, by the way, was one of the pilots that was in this air crash. He had 2 crashes in a season, I should say about 3 months. He flew that airplane between this tree and that post. See how it's bent? He knocked the limbs off the trees. He hit the house, and I think the boy inside was getting breakfast, and he had to get some stitches in his finger. But when this man hit, when he got out, he was able to limp run back up to the house to see if everybody's okay, and they were. So that's a story that, you know, that guy had a bad season, huh? This is the last picture now of P47. This was they were taking the leftover P47s to Trockman Junkyard, which is right beneath the Lloyd Expressway Bridge over Pigeon Creek. He was buying these, what was it, $135, $125, $135 each, and of course he was just wrecking them. My goodness. Doesn't it bring a tear to your eye? Yeah, it does. But I want to, this is December the 30th, 1950. This was the Evansville Courier. And right here, that paragraph and this paragraph said, "It is known that Republic Aviation has tried again," that implies 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, "to get possession of the plant now occupied by International Harvester." Republic was trying to come back to Evansville. Let me digress. By the way, International Harvester closed. This is 5 years later. International Harvester closed up. Republic Aviation went out of business 15 years later, and Whirlpool was in that plant for what, 44 years. Now let me tell you the rest of this. Farmingdale, New York was where the P47 was invented and developed, and that was the mother plant. The owners of Republic Aviation lived, that's Long Island, that's out from New York City. They had been residents of New York City, and that was their homes. The Farmingdale plant was a Depression era. It was like a 1930 building. And when you look, and I didn't show you a single picture there, when you look at the Farmingdale plant, they pushed those airplanes around, and when they got over in this area, they would put them on their nose to store them. Now that's not good productivity, would you agree? You know, you want it like Republic, like Toyota, like Whirlpool did with those refrigerators. You start here, and out the end comes the refrigerators, or comes a Toyota, or comes a P4. You want a good, smooth, efficient, effective flow. Well, at Farmingdale, they couldn't do that. And they were supposed to keep Republic Aviation open. Nobody ever said, but I know that story. Those guys didn't want to move from New York City to Evansville after the war to keep making airplanes. And Republic made some fine airplanes for the Korean War and early Vietnam, the 105, the F-86. They made great airplanes, but they were not efficiently made in that old building at Farmingdale, New York. So they were trying to come back to Evansville. Remember how many Evansville people, 31,000 people worked on airplanes in World War II? That's a heck of a mother load of skilled workers. It doesn't matter if you're riveting or doing hydraulics or electrical work or design or perfection, whatever it is. Evansville was filled up with this. And as best I could tell, there was no effort. There was zero effort made by the city, by the county, by anybody to keep Republic Aviation here after World War II. We were tired. I know my mom and dad were tired. I know you were tired. I was tired of World War II. Wanted to get it done with, wanted to get on with life. So we don't get to keep the airplane talents here. Well, you know, we'll build cars, we'll build refrigerators, what have you. So it was just not promoted, not pushed. Evansville never seemed to push back to Republic Aviation or any of the other airplane plants to come down and take that great building I was showing you. And here's the way it looked, and I can't date this picture. But let me talk about that. This is my last picture, by the way. This is when it was Whirlpool. See the sign right there? I could probably date this because I can see in the background the work that's back here where the tower and safety and emergency building is. I see the sign. Did Lyndon Johnson get rid of it? Keep it beautiful, you know, eliminate the road signs. That would have been in the 60s. I can't zoom in on a car to get definition to see what it is. And I could probably find the date on this building, which is over there in all of this big subdivision. So I can't date that very well. I've never really tried. But I like the picture, and I want to show you. So remember, right here was where the gun button was. See that? See the scar? That's the road where they would drive the airplanes on. Here's a Compass Rose, which is still out there. And this is a test strip, and this, I think this is gone. This is where the P47's would get up to speed and burn in the brakes and do all the instrument cockpit checking. And this was right here is the hangar that Dad worked in. There's the other hangar. They're still there, but they're all enclosed now. So this was Republic. After International Harvester had done the work, see, this has been the office building. That may be the original office building that was shaped like the airplane. It's hard to find it now. It really is. So, anyhow, this was the Whirlpool building. When I got into the buildings and do this historic buildings programs, I looked at buildings in a different way. And one thing I come to learn was what's important. What I think I learned was what's important. International Harvester, Whirlpool, and Republic Aviation had at least 40,000 men, women working there for incomes. Perhaps 50 or even, I didn't want to go over that, but it could have been 60 or 70,000 people made their livings in here in those 70 years. And that kind of makes it a pretty important building. I also count Roberts Stadium as an important building. 22 million people went through the gates of Roberts. 22 million people walked into Roberts Stadium and sat down and watched the Aces, or went to the auto show, or the home show, or what have you. To me, the first building was the one that's now where Channel 44 building is now. It's a McGarry warehouse. It was a city, it was a town hall, it was a courthouse, it was records, it was store, it was hospital, it was a ferry office, it was all of the, that's to me clearly the most important building in Evansville history. It's long gone, but this was certainly one of them, and still is today. It saddens me to drive by there and think of, you know, the history my dad had. My dad worked for all three of these companies, Republic, International Harvester, and Whirlpool for a little while. So, you know, this building fed me. It fed my family, and I love it. You know, this is a historic building. I'd give money to see this thing come back. That's one of the, today, when you look at it's like 25 feet high, unobstructed, wide base. You could build anything you wanted in there. Anything you wanted in that Whirlpool plant. It's great for refrigerators, great for P47. That's a show. You didn't have any questions as we went through. Do you have questions? Yes, ma'am.
Right now, can you show me on there where the pilot's lounge is?
I can't, yes, but I can't find it on here. The pilot, this is St. George Road. If you drive down about here, you can drive up inside there a little bit. And it's pretty clear if you've got to look for it. It's right on the extreme north edge of the high roof. There's a low roof below it. But yeah, it's that pilot's lounge is still there today. The picture I took of it, that's like 2 years old, so it's still up there. There was a question over here.
I have a comment. There was one of the women that did the test flying. She spoke at the Alexandrian Library. That is probably, years go by fast, so I'm going to say 5 years. She was in her 80s. I asked how she got here because, how did you get in this area to speak? She said, I flew. And
this was a test pilot that spoke down in Mount Vernon in the Alexandrian Library.
She said that they could not buy life insurance and that they got very little pay, if any, to test fly. And she said she did it just because she thought it was so important for the war and, to help get, to beat, who we were fighting at the time.
Connie says these women could not get insurance.
Life insurance, no.
Poor pay.
Yeah. They just did it for the United States to help the Allies.
Well, let me share this with you. Did you see the Jerry McFadden picture that was on the front of last Sunday's paper? She was a Rosie the Riveter, and Jerry said she made 60 cents an hour. I'm looking for my dad's paycheck. My dad was getting $1.25 per hour, which was the maximum for, I guess I'd say, skilled men workers. $1.25 per hour, and Jerry McFadden, Rosie the Riveter, got 60 cents an hour. Not quite half of what my dad made back here on his paycheck. Yeah, I was shocked because I figured these riveter women were making $1 an hour. No. Half of what and you say the ferry pilots were also poorly paid. Sometimes they work all day. Flying. Questions. There was a question up here somewhere.
Well, and they would fly like wherever they flew the plane to, that wherever it was needed, then they were just stuck there.
Yeah.
And I guess it depended on what company they were flying for, and then they had to figure out.
Reason for it to be a blue color?
Do you hear the question? Was there a reason for the blue color? Their story was for camouflage, but I think it was just simply to cut the light. Now, Rich and I had a question about this blue color. No, it was a plant engineering. I'm sorry, industrial relations manager asked me, was that glass naturally blue? Was it blue all the way through, or was it painted? All I remember is blue glass from when I was 7 years old. That was when I was 7 years old, and you don't know stuff like that. But my feeling is it was always blue, and my feeling is it was colored. The glass was colored. There was a tornado hit Evansville. 1945. The plant was still building airplanes, and it came across Stringtown Road and tore some houses down around Engelbrecht's Orchard, and it broke out hundreds of panes of glass in the west side. And this is the south, this is the north. So for years you could drive by and look at the slightly less blue panes of glass that had been replaced, and there was hundreds of them. They repainted the building. I know it was painted a few years back, so everything now again is even color. But you could drive by and you could see just hundreds of slightly less blue glass, which were all damaged by that tornado that blew through. And it picked up gravel off the railroad tracks and just threw that gravel into the building. Any more?
Can you go over that roof structure a little bit? If you look at the Chrysler plant in Evansville, they had an angled roof that would allow water to run off in the center there. You don't see it at the front of the building, but you do see an angled roof. But the angled roof would allow light in there as well as the runoff of water. And when you drive by on 41, you can't see it there. I guess you're showing us there, Harold.
Yeah, it's the top of the photo's cropped off. Yeah, that may have been ventilation. I was offered the opportunity. There's a walkway down those. See, there's walkway up here, where there was guards there, night and day, to watch what was going on the floor, so nobody would be putting stuff in their pockets. I didn't know that. I never knew that, but that was the case. So, yeah.
Those doors are opening a different way than the doors on the east of the building. Is that correct? Could you talk about that a little bit?
On which one?
This is the north end, I assume.
This is the north end.
And those doors look like they're opening up, but the doors on the east side open differently. Is that
I
correct?
don't have the east side. I don't know how they. East side had a lot of accessory buildings. What do I have on that? I forget what the first building shows. You can't see. You can see the walkways are up along here, where there was a walkway. I was offered to go up there. The day had already been long, and that's 35 feet high. And I was, no, another time maybe.
Harold, I did creative resume writing because Whirlpool was going to hire for a year to make a 14-foot refrigerator. So I got hired for a year because I wanted to get inside the plant and see what it looked like. In the beginning it was creosote, but now it's like asphalt or something. I don't know what it's covered with, but it's covered with something.
There's a creosote-like substance. This one, see the bricks? Yeah, it's a durable substance.
Over the top of,
yeah.
They're about like that, kind of like a railroad tie like thing, but they're shoved down into the ground, and it's just as level as it can be.
The crusher plant is made of that, and I think the reason is, see the tracks, see that track, see the tracks? There's a thing moving that's not pushed by men. There's a little chain down here that's pulling all of these things evenly down towards the north doors.
The refrigerator.
And that's so they can move, they can redo this. You see there's a concrete floor underneath there. So they just pull up the wood blocks and they can change out that assembly process, move it. If they wanted to move this thing over this way a few feet, they could do that. A lot of work, but they could do that. So, and every one of these people, Washington, Farmingdale, New York, did not have this. They pushed them by hand, and they had a storage place way over in one corner where there's maybe the picture shows 12 or 15 P47's tipped up on its nose for storage. And that's kind of their surge point. That when they bring them in there and they take the serial numbers. They try to keep the serial numbers in order. But Evansville plant is just smooth as silk.
Call that a sore tooth.
These have a name, clear story lines. Clear story. Anybody here an architect? See, it's got, the windows are here, 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 so that it gets ventilation and light in the vertical wall. And I'm not sure what the advantage of that is.
That building down here on Columbia Street by the road.
And I redid all of this, but there's a row of columns here, a row of columns here. I didn't show the columns here. There's like 4 big bays right down through here, all the way from the north to the south. Those are the widest. You call those bays between the columns because you can do what you can drive race cars through there if you want. Just don't hit the columns. But that's very efficient to have that great big wide space in there. And you can do whatever you want. You can drive semi-trucks through there all day long. Make a good place for that. I'm just surprised nobody's doing anything with that building. Well, they caught a saboteur, but they did arrest and sentence a man who was stealing. He was stealing, and there was. As far as Spies, that's only a rumor, but it was a fact. This man went to court and was sentenced in Evansville court, federal court, I think it was, for stealing. So yeah, it did happen. There was a story that the shipyard had that as well, and I suspect every place that was big in World War II has a similar story. There was a spy, there was a saboteur. Yeah, it could have been. Could have been. I don't know.
I've got a story about the construction of the plant, which you may not have heard. One of my high school classmates, her name was Emma Louise Signaler, and her father was Gus Signaler, and he was member of the Kaiser's army in World War I, the German army. Later, he immigrated to the United States and became a citizen. But all during the 1930s, nevertheless, that didn't keep him from tuning in on his shortwave radio and listening to Hitler's speeches. Gus, the company that had the general contract for building the building was Hoffman Construction Company.
That's this plant. Are you hearing
Yes.
all of this?
Yes.
The Hoffman Construction.
And Gus turned out to be the superintendent of construction. He's the one that supervised the building of the plant. And I've always thought that was quite remarkable. Here was a man of German immigration who listened to Hitler prior to the war on his shortwave radio, and yet here he was in charge of building a major war production facility to fight the Germans.
Did you hear the story? The man who was in charge of this construction? Yeah.
Emmy was a high school classmate. His Emma Louise, was a high school classmate of mine at Wrights High School. We were in the class of 1948. And she still lives here. She married Bill Schmidt, who 4 or 5 families at one time had tomato greenhouses out along North Darmstadt Road. And they still live out there at 10,000 Darmstadt Road.
Interesting.
And I used to rent from them.